Welcome to Crisis in Perception, where we examine the systems that shape our world. This is a compressed structural companion to our deep dive on the book, Why Nations Fail.
Today, we're tackling one of the biggest questions there is. Why are some countries so prosperous while others seem trapped in poverty? Well, the book Why Nations Fail argues that the answer isn't geography, it's not culture, and it's definitely not about leaders being ignorant. The real answer, it suggests, is hidden in the very design of society itself.
So here's the framework we're going to use to unpack this really powerful theory. We'll start by figuring out what the core system is. Then we'll get into the incentives it creates, check out its predictable outcomes, and finally try to understand why it's so incredibly persistent.
All right, to kick things off, let's look at a stark, real-world experiment. It shows how different sets of rules can create dramatically different worlds, even for people who share the exact same history and geography.
You know, before the 1940s, Korea was one single homogeneous nation, but today, their fates could not be more different. And this massive divergence wasn't caused by their location or their culture, it was caused by the man-made rules that were imposed on each side. One system just systematically crushed human incentive, while the other completely unleashed it.
So what do we call this underlying system? You know, the one that holds so much power over whether people get to thrive or are just forced to survive?
Well, the book calls these political and economic institutions, but what does that really mean? Essentially, they're the rules of the game. They are the human-made constraints that shape all our interactions, everything from whether your property is secure to whether you're even allowed to vote or start a business.
And honestly, this is the perfect metaphor. You can have the exact same hardware, the people, the land, the natural resources, but get wildly different results depending on the software, the operating system, that's running underneath it all.
Now, these societal operating systems, they can pretty much be sorted into two fundamental opposing categories, and it all comes down to who they're designed to benefit.
This is the crucial distinction right here. Inclusive institutions, well, they aim to create a level playing field, giving tons of people incentives to innovate and invest. On the flip side, extractive institutions are designed by a ruling elite specifically to siphon wealth and power from everybody else for their own benefit.
And here's where it gets really powerful. These two types of systems aren't just static. Over time, they create these self-reinforcing feedback loops that lead to very predictable results.
So inclusive institutions create a positive feedback loop, what we'd call a virtuous circle. Pluralistic politics supports open markets, which then generates broad prosperity. And that prosperity, in turn, reinforces and demands even more inclusive politics. You see, each piece makes the other pieces stronger.
But then you have extractive institutions. They generate a vicious circle. A narrow elite uses its absolute political power to design economic rules that make them rich. Then they use that wealth to buy more security, rig the laws, and solidify their political power, which locks the entire system in place.
Okay, so this raises a huge question, right? If extractive systems lead to stagnation and poverty for pretty much everyone, why on earth are they so common? Why don't leaders just switch to a better system?
Well, the answer comes down to something economists call creative destruction. Think about it. The very innovation and new technology that creates prosperity also threatens to upend the established order. It threatens the political and economic power of the elites. So, of course, they actively try to block it.
And this is a classic crisis in perception. It's so easy for us to misdiagnose the cause of poverty. We focus on these surface-level symptoms like culture or geography, while completely missing the underlying institutional operating system that's predictably generating these outcomes again and again.
These systems are just incredibly resilient because the people who benefit from them have every incentive and all the resources to defend them. And even when revolutions do happen, which you often see as the iron law of oligarchy kicking in, where a new elite just takes over the old extractive machinery for themselves and the whole cycle starts over.
So, for our last point, let's zoom out and see how these national systems are shaped by history and interact with bigger global forces. Because, no country exists in a vacuum.
Even small initial differences in institutions can, when they collide with major historical events, create these wildly divergent paths over centuries. Just look at this map. The presence or absence of serfdom after the Black Death created this fundamental institutional split between Eastern and Western Europe that you can still see echoes of today.
History matters profoundly. These critical junctures, these big, disruptive events, can either crack open a vicious circle or reinforce it, all depending on a society's starting point. And things like colonial legacies, for instance, the plantation systems in Barbados or resource extraction in Sierra Leone, they often lock nations into an extractive path that is just incredibly hard to escape.
So what's the big takeaway from all this? It's that a nation's destiny isn't sealed by its location or its culture. It's forged by the man-made political and economic rules it chooses to live by. It is all about the rules.
And that's what makes this framework such a powerful tool for analysis. It pushes us to look beneath the surface of daily events and ask a simple question: what are the rules shaping our own opportunities right here and right now?
Crisis in Perception examines how systems shape belief and how better tools help us see clearly.
This project is free and publicly accessible. If you'd like to support the time, tools, and research behind Crisis in Perception, you can become a supporter on Patreon. For a longer audio-based analysis of this topic, see the deep dive linked in the description.
If you enjoy this kind of systems-level analysis, please like, subscribe, and comment with books or topics you'd like us to explore next.